Hi everyone, my name is Angeliki Patsiavou and I'm really excited to be here today with the Dynamics user group. We have a marvelous session planned for you. As you can see, it's Avengers theme, so hopefully we have a few people out there that are as excited and geeky. So today's theme is simpler checklist with Power Automate in Dynamics 365. My name is Angeliki Patsiavou and again, super excited to be here today. Now, a little bit about me. So, as I mentioned, my name is Angeliki Patsiavou, and as you may gather from the accent, there is a few different nationalities going on there. I've been living in the UK for the last decade or so, so it's been a while and it definitely is home. But I'm originally Greek Italian. I work for Avanade within the business applications practice, and I'm also an MVP in business applications for the UK. So very proud, very much into both the Dynamics 365 side of the world and general Power Platform. But in my previous career, I was also change manager, so I'm ProSci certified. And with that in mind, I'm a little bit of a hybrid because of the different sides of CRM operations that I've been on. But primarily, CRM has always been my love language throughout my career, and not just within the dynamic space, but also general CRM systems. So I really do appreciate the different kinds of implementations and how important it is to have that human impact. I'm also very passionate about the Microsoft community. So you'll frequently find me within the community conferences and different kinds of events. I speak quite often in a blog. My blog is called empoweredhumans.net. So be sure to check it out. There's loads of cool articles that you will find, and they're all movie themed. That's kind of the deal whenever I get engaged with the community. So hopefully we have some fellow movie buffs out there and you'll love it. I'm also a human evangelist, and you may wonder what that's about. You know, you've probably heard about tech evangelist, but what is a human evangelist? So, in essence, this is a term I coined, and it's because when I first joined the community, I was absolutely amazed by all the incredibly smart people that were evangelizing about all the tech and how to implement it essentially. But what I felt is that it was really important that we had more people that were advocating about the human impact that our technology has. So, who are the users that we're building for? Why are we doing it? And how can we really empower them? And that's where the human evangelist comes in. And I'm really excited to be on this journey with many other people that are ultimately looking to have that kind of impact. You'll see my socials throughout the slides, and please do reach out to connect. It's always fantastic to meet the rest of the community. So, our session is about checklists, and you may wonder why this is even a topic. Why are checklists an interesting one to tackle, and how can this be applied to your side? Well, to begin with, we have to think about different industries. So the reason I worked on this solution and thought it's a very good application in various industries is because of the variety of use cases that it entails. So let's think of it this way. You are in the medical field, in the healthcare field, and you're a nurse or a doctor. You're doing your rounds. What you usually have is a chart with your patients. You go into your different checks as part of your rounds. And traditionally, we've seen that that's in a paper format. But ideally, we want to digitize these processes. In that sense, though, this kind of users need a very easy, accessible view. So how do we do that? Very similarly, you'll see it in the retail sector, for example. Let's say you're in a shop floor and you're doing inspections, or maybe you're checking up on stock. Very similarly, you have that kind of piece of paper, you have all your different products in rows, and you're performing different checks. It doesn't necessarily happen in an alphabetical order or any kind of order because of the way you're going around the room. So you want everything in one go. Bottom line, there's a lot of industry use cases that you may find that have this approach that we want to digitize. Now, of course, the first thing we think about is automation. We live in this fantastic era of AI where we want to give opportunities to automation to make our lives more easy to tackle from a productivity perspective and to reduce admin. But in this case, this is not always possible. As we said, this process might not always be linear. there might not be enough resources available, and sometimes there's just human judgment needed because we need that human verification within this nonlinear process. Now, another thing you might wonder is, okay, cool, why don't we consider business process flows? This is a fantastic way to generally tackle this staged approach and these multiple items that we have to review within our CRM system. Well, firstly, the way we would need to build this is a little bit of an inception point. So it would have to be some kind of nested build. And when we work at components that are nested within each other, it can be complicated to not just build, but also to maintain. And usually we want to build solutions that have that simplicity and extensibility for the future caretakers, for the future admins, for our future makers. Secondly, it's the format as well. If we go back to the point around this is an industry use case around certain areas where people are going through this nonlinear approach, they need ease of access, they need this accessible and not too different from the current paper approach. Because remember, human resistance to change, this is very important for our people. We have to consider a different way that makes the checks super visible, super easy to fill in parallel, but also in a non-linear format, especially when we have different manual dimensions we're checking against. So with that in mind, let's go to our use case. So in this particular situation, we are helping Tony, also known as Iron Man. Now, what do we know about Tony? Tony is one of the Avengers leaders, and he, along the Avengers, S.H.I.E.L.D. and so forth, go through all sorts of superhuman battles. So in this particular case, we're going to build a system for Tony and the Avengers to be able to manage a checklist for all the ways they need to prepare for battle. This is going to have multiple rows because there's different areas that they need to prepare in, whether it's intelligence, whether it's security equipment, whether it's field and resource preparation. There's all sorts of things. And in fact, there's 5 different areas, as we mentioned. So there's a lot of different checks that we need to incorporate. Furthermore, we are building, and we'll see in a moment actually, a full-blown solution called Avengers 365. Now, as a big fan of CRM, I just had to incorporate Dynamics into this. However, this is essentially a custom model-driven app, so you can very easily build this as part of your Power-Ups. Ultimately, when it comes to battle management, we have built a full-blown solutions for the Avengers, and it has different kind of stages and checkpoints. One of them will include the checklist, but it is part of the wider business process flow. What kind of checks are we performing? Now remember, our rows are different kind of area checklists, items. We want to see whether we've passed the check or not. That's a very binary approach. However, we won't use a yes/no field. We want to keep it blank, so we're going to have to go with choice. We're going to have a free text field for comments, and this is so we can note as part of our checkpoint process whether we have, let's say, in any case of failures, we want to note down some actions that need to be taken. For example, some of our security equipment is down, what kind of repairs need to happen, and so forth. And as a result, we also want to have an actioned choice field as well. Very similar to past, but this one is not compulsory. This is something that we want to use as optional in case we have a failure in our past. In this case, our comments will host a recommended action, and once that has been actioned, we can communicate it through this third column. So it's very easy to see line by line how we are tracking. And it's also very easy if we were to export it, for example. Remember, this needs to be accessible. It needs to be very easy to fill in, especially as we are talking about users that are very busy. They're not really having too much time worrying about CRM entries at this point. They are saving humanity, right? They are very busy. They have all sorts of superhuman threats going around, so they just need it to work. and we need to make it easy for them to be supported. Right, so I want us to have a very brief overview of the data model. Now, bear in mind, this is just a small snapshot. This is by no means the full data model. I will explain a little bit as we browse the app what different entities include, but for this one, I just wanted to focus on 3. Now, one of our custom entities is battle, and this is going to be hosting all of our records for the different battles that the Avengers have either completed in the past, are currently preparing for, or they have leads for the future. This is our main table, and it's a custom one. However, if you wanted to a little bit liken it to something, think about the opportunity table that comes in Dynamics 365 sales. It's quite similar in terms of how we would approach it, but in this case, we built something completely custom. Now, we have 2 peripheral entities that are supporting our solution. The first one is the one called battle checklist, and this has a many-to-one relationship with our primary battle entity. Now, what is this about? So the battle checklist is going to hold our checklist data, and it's going to be used in order to create that relationship that will be hosted in a subgrid format within the battle record to communicate those checklist points. So we're going to have things like what's the item about? What is the specific checklist point? We're going to have the area, which is going to be one of those 5 areas that we discussed earlier, such as security, intelligence, planning, and so forth. And then, of course, the 3 main columns that we are checking against. So past, comments, and actions. We've talked about their formats. Item is going to be a simple single line of text, and then area is going to be another simple kind of column, and in this particular case, a choice column. In the periphery, but not directly connected through a relationship, we have another entity, and this one's called battle checklist template. And what we're going to host here is a predefined set of data around the items that our checklist should include and the categories. Now you may wonder why we need this entity. Why do we sounding like we have synonyms between item and checklist item on area and category? Very good mystery, but let's demystify it. So what we're doing here is fulfilling a business need for golden source of data and a single streamlined approach when it comes to our checklist. What happens sometimes when we use subgrid lines is that even though we want to follow a very specific format and process, let's say have 3 specific kind of lines within the subgrid that needs to have data filled in, usually, unless it's specified somehow, users will approach it their own way, which means that you're not going to have a uniform set of data. Some users may end up with 1 line, some with 2, some with 3, some with 13. So in fact, we want to make sure that all of our users, whether it's Tony or any of the Avengers or even Shield agents, are approaching this in a uniform way without even amending the type of checklist items that they are controlling or the areas that they're up against. So by separating that data, we are going to make sure we're maintaining a golden source of truth. Our users are following the same process, but also it's a very easy way to maintain updates. So when it comes to, let's say, updating an existing checklist item, adding a new category, or anything in between, we can give access to specific super users, for example, that should be doing that maintenance. No one else can have access to it, and you're maintaining, once again, that golden source of truth. But we're also going to use this entity as part of our automation to load up into our battle checklist subgrid this kind of data when the time is right. And we will see in a moment when the time is right what that means. But either way, we have these 3 entities that we're going to be working with. Obviously, not an exhaustive list as part of our data model, and we'll see a little bit about the rest later. So Being an Avenger is not simple, right? You have all sorts of human and superhuman threats. It's quite exhausting sometimes and very complicated. However, our checklists don't have to be. The way we build our solutions should be simple enough, should be easily configurable, as well as extendable, because remember, we want to leave a legacy for our users, our admins, and our makers ecosystem. Now, there is a little bit of a pun here, so hopefully we have a few movie buns appreciating this. So at the top right, we have a still from one of the Avengers movies where we have three of our superheroes by the Avengers training headquarters. I was lucky enough earlier in the year to find the filming location for this, so I absolutely had to take a silly picture. It did take a fair bit to be caught flying in that sense, but it was an amazing moment. It is a great filming location and definitely a cool fun fact. So definitely recommend it for those of you who are interested. This is out of Norwich in the UK in the local university in their Visual Center of Arts, so definitely worth a visit. Enough about that though. Let's look at our components that are going to give us this checklist automation solution. So we looked about our three tables or three entities that are part of the key components in the data model. We're going to use a subgrid, and this is how we are going to be performing the checklist. Of course, the template table is going to be very important because it's going to lift and shift our golden source of truth data into our subgrid. Of course, this is going to be done through Power Automate flow. This is how we are using the better together story between Dynamics 365 or generally Power Apps and Power Automate. And this will give us that instant editable table, that way of giving that accessible solution to our users. Right, so I think it's time to go for that demo and look at this in action. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen and I'm going to start sharing the other screen with our demo. So let's leave this a second or two to load. Fantastic. Right. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a tour of the Avengers 365 app. So as I mentioned, you can either rebuild this within the Dynamics 365 instance, or you can build your custom model-driven app. But either way, what do we have here? This is an app that is helping the Avengers not only prepare for battle, but manage all sorts of things that help them save humanity, really. So, of course, we talked about battles. So we're going to have in our side navigation map our battles, and in particular, the active battles that the Avengers are in participation of. We have all sorts of data points here. For example, if we were to open up one of our records, we'll see there's quite a lot going on. So we'll see at the top right our lovely customized business process flow. Of course, we've customized it based on the endgame palette, but by all means, there's so many different approaches to this. So we have our business process flow that details the four stages in which you start from qualifying a threat that has been shared in similar way to how a lead comes up in the sales process. And then we have different stages that the Avengers have to go through in order to qualify that lead threat, to develop a battle plan, to eventually start action in conjunction with Shield, and eventually stop the threat. As part of that, we have a few tabs in our main form. There is a lot of data points around the lead Avengers that is supporting this, the financials around all the equipment and the general spend, because of course we have a very specific kind of need when it comes to securing armor for each battle. We have tracked all the other Avengers that are supporting, because it's very important to have an understanding of the ecosystem. We have, of course, the villains that we are up against, because we know how they usually are in coalition with each other. So it's very important to track their profiles. The magic will happen, as you can see here, through the battle checklist tab. And this is how we've enabled the flow already. So this is a record where we can already see the flow has already been run. And we have our items, our checkpoint item in each row, and the area that it belongs in loaded up. Thanks to this toggle, the prepare for battle toggle. This is part of the magic, and this is how it's triggered as part of the flow. So when you reach the right time for you to prepare for battle, you use the toggle, but similarly, you could have, let's say, command ribbon item and initiate JavaScript based on that, and then a Power Automate flow. There's all sorts of things you could be doing, but ultimately we want users to have that access point to then initiate the checklists. So as we can see here, we have a compulsory field around whether this checklist has passed or not, super important. We have some optional items around commentary, which is free text, and then whether it's been actioned, yes or no. But again, this is optional because you may not always have actions against it, so it's important to keep it easy for the users. We have other kinds of data as well. On top of battle management, we are managing the Avengers profiles. Now, this is super important because we have all sorts of Avengers that are part of the ecosystem. So whether you're Tony or Thor and you're one of the lead Avengers, you want to make sure that your portfolio is up to date so you can deploy the superheroes in the right battle or to support the right civilians, right? So we have their portfolio there. We have protected cities, which are the cities under the official protection of the Avengers. We have comms from Jarvis, similar to how you would look at activities and the way that you would interact with your personalized bot. In this case, Jarvis is your AI assistant. We have leads similar to the sales process, but these are leads about threats that are coming from Shield. So we're definitely looking at that. Similarly to monitoring the Avengers profiles portfolio, we also do that for villains, because similar to the sales process where you would have competitors, we want to make sure that we are monitoring that at all times. If you are a very deep movie buff about the Avengers, you'll find some other Easter eggs here. So we're monitoring Hydra attacks, we're monitoring monolith counts, and I've gone pretty far down this rabbit hole. There's a lot of movie-based data, so it's as accurate as possible. And yeah, it's pretty fun to build these worlds. Either way, we want to see this in action first, and then we're going to unpack it. So what I'm going to do is delete the battle checklist data so we see it in action. So for that, we're going to delete our items first. And then we are also going to click now in our toggle and save that. Now, let's assume this is a brand new record. We're still qualifying the threat. We've assigned Carol Danvers, who is Captain Marvel, for this battle in Edinburgh, and we're ready to go to the next stage. Now, at this point, we also know how much money we have available to spend on armor, and we know who's deciding on that. So we've got that cleared off. Now, with that in mind, we are also ready to prepare for battle in terms of looking at our checklist. So the first thing that we're going to do is click toggle to yes, basically, for the prepare for battle column. And then, of course, save. Now, what you will notice is that there's column level security for this as well, because we want to make sure that there's a certain security model when it comes to who is able and who should be essentially be preparing for battle and triggering this Power Automate flow. Now, of course, depending on your use case and your security model, we don't necessarily have to implement this, but I wanted to show different approaches to the security model. So in this case, we just want to have some senior Avengers super users that have a column level security profile allowed for this, and thus the approach. But again, it's up to your use case. So let's refresh the record and look at that. Our flow has triggered. So what we've seen is that the subgrid went from blank to having our 10 rows of data that has the different items that we're going to have a check against. For example, check the Jarvis is working and the comms are on, and that's part of our systems checks. We are told now that we have a mandatory column for past, which is the yes or no choice field. And you can see this is yes or no because it's by default blank. And of course, comments and actions are columns that we can, as optional, fill in. Now, before we go and unpick how this has been built, I want us to check something else, which we will see as part of the configuration. And this is a general topic that I want us to cover. So when it comes to automations, kicking on, especially subgrids, we don't want them to always trigger. So what I mean by that, in this case, for example, we've already triggered it, we got our data. What if our users are playing back and forth with this toggle? Might be by accident, might be confusion. Either way, we want to create systems that are future-proof, that are bulletproof when it comes to this kind of users, kind of interactions. So in this case, we are going to enhance our Power Automate flow so it does not trigger again when it comes to data already existing. What I mean by that is that we're going to add a validation point in our Power Automate flow to say, check first if there's any subgrid line items, which essentially means check if there's any child record data in the battle checklist table against the parent being the battle table. So if that's the case, don't trigger, terminate the flow. But if it is the case as in it's empty, then by all means. So let's check that this one trigger. So what we'll do is set the prepare for battle toggle to no, click save, then refresh a little bit and check that we don't have a second page. So you can see this because we are clicking on next page at the bottom of the subgrid next to page 1 on the right, but we're not seeing any more data. This is because our flow will not trigger again. We have added this checkpoint. The way we're going to build it, we're going to see it, of course, in a moment, but it's a very useful tactic when it comes to avoiding unnecessary runs. Now, you also don't want to be caught in a loop, right? You don't want runs affecting your performance for no reason. There's all sorts of benefits to this. So think about how this could apply to your own use case. So we've seen this work. Let's unpick the configuration. Right. So the first thing that we're going to look at is within the Maker portal, we're going to look at the battle table. And what we've done here, of course, we have built to begin with through the data model, all the columns that are part of it in our schema. And then, of course, we have created a form. It's the main form that we observed in the demo. So what we've done essentially is, apologies, so we have our main form here that we have built for our CRM application. And this is where we positioned everything, including our subgrid, our toggle, and the way you would do it with the component as well. So this is one of our important parts as we are configuring everything. So, oh, and in case you're wondering about the theme customization, this is part of the old school themes that you're able to do through the So the advanced settings, so you're able to look at customization there of all sorts of things. It can be the business process flow, it could be the coloring of your links, it could be the coloring of the subgrid lines and how they're highlighted, all sorts of things. So it's up to you and how you want to set up your hex codes. Either way, so this is our main form. Now, you may observe here that we have other main forms as well and may wonder why. So this solution also has a Power Pages aspect to it, which we're going to see a little bit later. And I like keeping things clean, especially as we recreate this in Power Pages. So what we'll find is that our CRM app has its own main form. And then our portal, our Power Pages portal, will have its own as well. Now, this is delving into the world of multi-step forms, so we're not going to look at it just yet, but ultimately we've segregated that so we can control them separately because they are addressing different users. You know, our Avengers team are our backend users. Our portal will be for field agents, which are front-end users using a simple version of our CRM data configuration. So that segregation helps, among other reasons, by the way. The first table has been covered. Let's look at battle checklist. Now, we said this is a table that will hold our checklist data, and in particular, the different columns that we just saw in the subgrid. This is the parent-child record relationship that we've been describing. So we will have, again, set up within our schema the columns, the 5 columns that we've discussed, and of course, in the view as well, the subgrid view, right? The final piece of the puzzle when it comes to our data model and our setup is the battle checklist template table. Now, this is where we have, as I was saying earlier, the golden source of truth when it comes to our data that we only want some of our super users to amend. So we have here the checklist item and category that we've applied some security to also only be accessible and amendable by specific kinds of users. And with that in mind, it makes it very easy when certain updates needs to happen in each row, or maybe even additions, removals, and so forth. So ultimately, this is hosting our data, and it makes it very easy to manage. Now that we've seen our data model, let's go into our Power Automate flow. Now we can refresh our runs and see how we just run now twice, one with a success, once with a cancellation. The reason being is that the success point is where we didn't have any child data and thus it ran. The cancellation point is because we also have a branch that says if you find any child data, then please terminate. Now, this is super helpful because we still want our flows to run and tell us at what branch they went, and this is a very easy way to discern it. But let's unpick it, right? Let's unpick it and see what's going on. So we're going to find there's different ways of doing this ultimately. But we do want to implement the right checks so we don't keep adding lines and ultimately running flows as such unnecessarily. How do we get this automated flow started? Let's unpick our trigger. So this trigger is the classic Dataverse one. When a row is added, modified, or deleted, we know and love it. In terms of change type, it's perfectly enough to talk about modified. Of course, the table name is battles is our plural name for the main table that we're working with in this data model, which is the battle table. In this case, it is a demo, so I have added a scope organization, but please do bear in mind to look at your security model and adjust accordingly. Now, the extra spin to this is our filter query. So we have in the filter rows section a query to say that we need to look at our toggle, which is called AP underscore prepared for battle. That is true or not equals false. Either way, so it would be either EQ true or any false. Either way, what we're saying is we want to look at a modified line when the toggle has been set to yes. This is the yes, no column, and this is why it has this binary Boolean kind nature. So we have our trigger. What do we do next? So we are going to look at the battle checklist and start performing that validation. Essentially, we're going to tell the flow to look within the battle record and the child relationship of battle checklist and find, retrieve as in retrieve, the rows that are available to this parent-child relationship. So we're going to have a stable name, battle checklist, a plural name for the table, and then we're going to have our fetch XML query. Now this is fun because we're essentially doing some really cool things in order to retrieve those records. Some advice in terms of fetch XML. Everyone has their own comfort levels or their own approach when it comes to fetch XML. You may be the kind of person that does it like that straight away. That's awesome. You might be the kind of person that goes into advanced find, creates the query there and downloads it to put it in there. Or you might use absolutely the awesome tool within XRM Toolbox, Fetch XML Builder. Or you may have another way. Either way, the point I wanted to make is that whatever you retrieve as your query, have a look at it. There may be ways to optimize. So it might be that your query is technically correct, but it may impact your performance and just your general approach to giving it into the flow. So I want to give you 3 tips when it comes to writing your query after we analyze it. Let's look at it quickly before we code to the tips. So what this fetch XML query is doing is saying, look at the battle checklist entity, and we want to connect the battle checklist record if we do find line items where it's a battle lookup field matches the as foreign primary key of the main battle table, which essentially means in super fancy technical terms that there is a line record with a battle, the lookup field connected to our source parental record of battles. And this is as simple as the query will get, really. Now, this may look simple, but we have done a bit of optimization. So when I first pulled it from advanced find, what I noticed is that it was performing unnecessarily long steps. So for example, it was going to pull all of the line items, but in reality, the way we build this flow, it's an all or nothing approach. You're either going to have all your lines or you're just going to have none. Now in this case, it's 10. It's a demo. We wanted to keep it simple. Imagine if you had a very strong, tons of rows. Now, when that happens, this is going to take a long time to run. It may even get stuck. So to think about performance and just make this run faster, what we've said is don't give me everything, not needed. Just give me the first result. You could easily limit this to your number of choice. So let's say top 5 rows, top 10 rows. This is ultimately giving you a quick trick to reduce your runtime. The other thing that I wanted to mention, which you may observe as you take a fetch XML query out of somewhere else, is that you have distinct equals false as part of your fetch XML node at the top. Now, this is not really doing anything if you're not worried about getting duplicate values. So 2 things there. Number 1, whether you put it in there or not, this happens by default. So really, doesn't make much of a difference. Of course, if you don't care about duplicates, then absolutely you need to have distinct equals true. But otherwise, it's not really doing anything. The third thing that I wanted to mention is attributes. Now, another thing that I observed when it came to taking an fetch XML query out of advanced find, for example, but it may be out of other ways that you've generated it, is that it's retrieving a lot of attributes. So I observed a lot of columns of my battle checklist record being retrieved as well. This is taking time and this is unnecessary. All I want to know out of this child record, should it exist, is does it have the connection to the lookup? So in essence, you can remove those rows as well. Of course, there may be other ways to optimize your query. So the call out here is have a look, play around with your query, not just because it may not work, but also because it's important to optimize. It's that kind of mindset that really help us help our admins, help our developer ecosystem or maker ecosystem, and truly make Fusion teams a lovely reality. So enough about fetch XML and our list rows action. Let's go into our validation now, because we've said retrieve the records, the child records should they exist. Now what? Now this is where we're going to perform our conditional check. In this validation, which again we've named because it's super important that we rename each step, each action to make sure that we are communicating to whoever is reading this what we're doing. Super important hygiene. Is we have an expression here. It's a really cool expression. Let's open it up. So this expression, the empty expression, is telling us look at whether our list rows action and the output it retrieved, as in the subgrid line items, is it empty or not? So this is the part where it says is equal to true. So the list rows is retrieving records, or at least attempting to. If it's empty, as in we didn't retrieve any records, this is a brand new battle record, hasn't triggered the flow yet, or hasn't ultimately have line records, then if this is true, then go to the happy path. Go to the yes branch on the left and start inputting the battle checklist template data into the battle checklist subgrid. And this is what we see here. So we're going to list all the rows from a battle checklist template table, which holds our segregated golden source of truth data. And then we are going to start matching those values. So we said we have the synonymous kind of column names, which, by the way, you're not obligated to have them. I just like that kind of extra OCD hygiene. So what are we doing there in terms of matching? So we have the table name, of course. We are going into the battle checklist subgrid table. And then we start playing matching. So area, which is in battle checklist, is called category in the battle checklist template table. And similarly, item is called checklist item. Of course, it's important to match your table as well, your parent table. And just remember, you need the logical name and then to also find it as part of your dynamic content to perform the full match. Now, this is a happy path. This is what we saw when we enabled it through the toggle in our CRM environment. But what happens if the person has been playing with the toggle essentially, but the data is already there? This is where the no branch comes in. So if we're saying that there's already data, so it's not really empty, empty equals true is not the case, then we're going to add a terminate action. And with a status of cancelled, easy, right? So this will tell us that the flow has run when we were checking all of our run history, so that we know at a particular time if we run a successful generation of the checklist item, or because we already had data in there, we had to cancel. It's much easier than going through the output history and looking at the errors if there should be some. And ultimately, this is the kind of validation that you can perform in other kinds of flows. So with that in mind, I want us to look very briefly, without going into the rabbit hole of the portal, how this looks like. How do the battle checklists look like? So let's go to the portal. Let's go to the home first. So this is the Power Pages portal for Shield. It's called Shield Declassified. And as we're loading it up, I'm going to give you a brief tour of what this does. We are here logged in as Maria Hill, one of the top agents at Shield. And we are using this Power Pages portal for a variety of missions, really. So we're using it as an onboarding tool for agents. We are using it to have all sorts of briefings. So here we have some lovely iframes with briefings from Agent Fury, of course, Tony, Agent Coulson, and so forth. And this is some great ways to integrate iframes and all sorts of multimedia content within your environment. And we are using it, of course, for supporting the Avengers. This is our front-end users, our Shield agents. We are using it as a secure line to communicate threats, and this is where our leads come into CRM and so forth. So active battle support, this is where we will see our subgrid with, where a list really, with all the battle data that is also available to the Avengers so that the Shield agents can support. Now, this has all sorts of fun functionality built in. We got lists, we got basic forms, we got multi-step forms, we got metadata configuration to support cool things like subgrids and all sorts of attribute logic. There's a lot of fun Power Pages elements going on here. But what I did want to show you is a little bit of the agent experience when it comes to Shield using this portal. So here, what they can do is they can view data for past battles. And this is read-only. That's why their only option is to view the details in read-only mode. And hence why I was saying that this is going to be a separate form in our table just for the portal. As you can see, this is all read-only. We are able to navigate between different tabs and view the data. And this is a bespoke web page, by the way, that we're hosting this multi-step form in. So we have amended the navigation accordingly, well, introduced rather, so that ultimately as a user, you have the right entry and exit points at any point. So this is for data that it has been, that has taken place in the past when it comes to the battle record. But if it's current data, then we're also enabling editability. Now, we're controlling all of this through Fetch XML in the Power Pages management side of things. And what I mean by that is that we go into Power Pages management and we are controlling our list through Fetch XML for the different kind of actions, which are to read, to edit, or to create new records, which are very important. You can find them within your options tab in your list. And this is where we use grid configuration actions and Fetch XML as needed. But if we go back to our approach here, as I said, you can also create new records. This means that you're a Shield agent that is initiating, let's say, a new battle support record because maybe the Avengers have fallen. Maybe you have been taking the lead recently, especially if you're Maria Hill. So you can see all sorts of cool things here happening. Ultimately, the multi-step form is an exciting world. You can add within the context of the checklist, you can very similarly go line by line and add your data when it comes to a record having passed or not the check, or comments free text, or whether it's been actioned. But the good thing about it is that you see it configured in a very similar way. And this is very important, obviously, because we want to emulate the same experience. By all means, if you want to make it look even more snazzy, then there's other ways to either implement JavaScript or Liquid to implement some extra functionality on top. But ultimately, Power Pages Management will take you on this journey. So we've seen here how you can emulate this on the Power Pages side as well. A little bit of a summarization then in terms of what the key elements are here, even though we're not going to go through the full detail. So we're using basic forms. This is single tab forms. We are using, and important to name all of them, we are using multi-step forms, and this is to create that multi-tab experience that we know and love in Dynamics. Of course, we are hosting this multi-step forms in a bespoke web page. So you'll see it here that we've built that. This means that we can also affect the navigation. So for example, here I've added navigation points in and out of the form and back to the main page. This is very important and gives you that autonomy eventually. And the ultimate host in this case is the list. So we have all the configuration here to configure the actions, the behavior for each action, let's say a success message, the data is retrieving, but of course security is separate. And this is where table permissions comes in, as well as page permissions, web roles, and all the good stuff. I'm not going to go through the whole security model just in the interest of time, but I do want to mention something when it comes to table permissions. So when it comes to the main table, it's very important that we have read, update, and create access, because we want our agents to look at reading all data or even current data, to update data for battles that have not been completed yet, and of course to create new records. So that makes sense, right? But then when it comes to all the relationships between the battle table and other tables, whether it's the ones that we've looked at or even other tables such as the Avengers one, which is a version of a contact table, or let's say protected cities, which is a version of an account table, and so forth, we need to create this connected relationships as well. And this is why we see in the sub arrows here all these different relationships. Now, because of these connections, we can't just look at read, update, and create. We need to look at append and append to kind of relationships to make sure that our lookups are rendering, to make sure that our subgrids are rendering, and all those great components and relationships are coming to life. So don't forget that when you're building in Power Pages, to look at what connected relationships you have that you need to enable table permissions for. But of course, security is super, super important. So look at your page permissions and your web roles to make sure that at all times this is accessible by the right people. This is a demo, so that's why you'll see sometimes things like global access authenticated users, but ideally you have a security model that is very specific to the web roles and kinds of users you should only authorize this for. So we have seen, let's summarize, right? So we have seen the kind of tables that drive our Avengers 365 app, and the different nuances of the battle process, the different tabs, the different data we capture, the business process flow, and ultimately where the checklist comes into the picture and comes to life. We have seen the different tables and the schema, forms, and views that are required for that between the three main tables. And of course, we have seen it in its glory, the Power Automate flow that is driving this. So we are triggering based on the toggle being switched to yes. We start looking through a fetch XML query whether there's child records with our optimized approach as well. And then ultimately we perform a validation of whether our output of this child record retrieval has borne any fruit. So if there is no child record items, then we go to the yes, branch, and happy path, generate the data through the flow and see our subgrid, get some line items. Or if we do find there's records already there, then we terminate with a cancel status. So ultimately our run history is going to indicate it. And if we go into Power Pages, we're going to build it in a way that our front-end users are able to also interact with this, of course, with the right security model and configuration between our design studio, where you see the table permissions here, whether we build the different kind of pages and components, and of course with that ultimate approach between the different content approach in Power Pages management. So this is our summary. Let's go back to the slide for closing. As I mentioned earlier, in terms of writing fetch XML queries, the automation tips were to firstly limit the number of records you're returning. This is the top and whatever amount of lines you want to retrieve. In this case, one was enough. One, it's either going to be all 10 or one, or however many you have in your data. So it's super quick to run just for one, but ultimately limited to what makes sense. Maybe it's the top 5, top 10, top 50. You know, it's important for your performance. Secondly, have a look. Do you need to worry about duplicates? Does it even matter? Ultimately, having distinct equals false without really caring about duplicates doesn't make a difference. It's going to be there by default whether you mention it or not. So here we are. And finally, especially if you're taking your fetch XML query from another source, minimize the attribute retrieval. You'll find that there's multiple lines of attributes that are being retrieved, but it's not adding any value to your record. In this case, I was given maybe like 5 different lines of attributes, but in fact, I only needed to check that my battle lookup had that foreign key, that connection to the table, the parent table. So it was enough. This is the end for this webinar. So thank you so much for watching. Keep connecting to the Dynamics user group. Many opportunities between this and next year, including DynamicsCon. So definitely keep getting engaged. And please do reach out. You'll find in these QR codes 3 things. On the left, you have my Linktree account. So if you scan it, you'll find all the different socials that we can connect on, my blog, empoweredhumans.net, and all sorts of cool things. And then we have on the right 2 blog posts. We have first in the middle, the main blog post for setting up the checklist automation. And this has step-by-step instructions, screenshot everything you need to recreate Event 365 with regards to this automation. And finally, on the far right, we have an extra blog post on how to implement that extra validation for making sure you don't have child records already. Now, this is a separate blog post because it can be used for other kinds of automations as well. So feel free to use in other use cases. I'd love to hear about it, so please do reach out. But either way, that post as well has this kind of step-by-step approach, so you will find it ultimately and be able to recreate it. But otherwise, thank you so much again for watching. It's been an absolute pleasure. Big shout out to the Dynamics user group for having me over, and otherwise, have a lovely day ahead. Bye.